The chamber of the Galactic Assembly hummed with barely contained tension as Ambassador Korthax of the Veldrani Empire rose from his crystalline seat. His scales shimmered under the artificial starlight that filtered through the domed ceiling, each iridescent pattern catching the light like oil on water. Around him, representatives from 17 different species watched with expressions ranging from amusement to outright disdain. Elder Morvith, the ancient Theshan sage whose species had traveled the stars for over 40,000 years, leaned forward in her hovering throne. Her skin, translucent and revealing the slow pulse of luminescent blood beneath, seemed to glow brighter as she spoke. Her voice carried the weight of millennia, each word measured and deliberate. "I implore this assembly once more," she said, her telepathic projection amplifying her words so that every being present felt them resonate in their consciousness. "Do not proceed with the subjugation fleet. Earth must remain untouched. The humans must be left alone." Korthax's laughter echoed through the chamber, a harsh barking sound that his translation device rendered into something universally understood as mockery. "Elder Morvith, with all due respect to your considerable age, you speak of a primitive species barely capable of escaping their own gravity well. They have not even achieved faster than light travel. They fight among themselves over resources they have not yet learned to properly harvest. They are nothing." The Veldrani ambassador gestured toward the holographic display at the center of the chamber, where a blue and green world rotated slowly. Clouds swirled across its surface, and the lights of primitive cities twinkled on the night side. It looked peaceful, vulnerable. "Look at them," Korthax continued, his voice dripping with contempt. 8 billion individuals, consuming their planet's resources with no thought for sustainability. They poison their own atmosphere, acidify their own oceans. They are a species committing slow suicide. We would be doing the galaxy a favor by bringing them under proper governance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Dreth Collective, a hive-mind species that occupied 17 worlds, pulsed with synchronized approval. The Korathi Federation's delegation nodded their feathered heads in unison. Even the normally neutral Silmari observers seemed to lean toward support of the Veldrani proposal. Elder Morvith's glow dimmed slightly, a sign of distress that only those who knew her species would recognize. She had lived for 3,000 years, had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, had seen species ascend to greatness and others crumble to dust. But in all her long existence, she had never felt such certainty about anything as she felt now. "You do not understand," she said, her telepathic voice carrying an undertone of something the assembled species had never heard from a Theshan elder: fear. The Theshans have observed humanity for over 2,000 of their years. We watched them when they were building pyramids with nothing but rope and determination. We watched them when they split the atom. We watched them when they set foot on their moon. And that is precisely my point," Korthax interrupted, scales rippling with impatience. "They required chemical rockets to reach a satellite only 300,000 kilometers away. Our children's toys are more advanced than their greatest achievements." Elder Morvith's eyes, deep pools of swirling silver, fixed on the Veldrani ambassador with an intensity that made even his scales seem to dim. "You measure advancement in technology, ambassador. You see their primitive rockets and their crude energy sources, and you see weakness. But we Theshans learned long ago to measure a species by different metrics." She rose from her throne, her ancient body unfolding with surprising grace. At her full height, she was nearly 3 meters tall, her elongated form seeming to stretch toward the stars themselves. "We measure by adaptability, by determination, by the capacity for violence tempered with the capacity for mercy. And by these metrics, humanity is the most terrifying species we have ever encountered." The chamber fell silent. The word terrifying, coming from an elder of the Theshans, a species that had peacefully observed the galaxy since before most present species had developed language, carried weight that even Korthax could not entirely dismiss. Terrifying. The word came from delegation leader Yeneth of the Korathi, her crest of golden feathers rising in what her species recognized as skeptical amusement. "Elder, with respect, you speak of beings who cannot even agree on a single planetary government. They have over 200 separate nation-states. They have fought 2 global wars within living memory. They are divided, disorganized, and demonstrably inferior. Elder Morvith turned to face the Korathi leader, and something in her expression made Yeneth's crest flat instinctively. You see division. I see a species that channels aggression into competition rather than extinction. You see their wars as weakness. I see a species that nearly destroyed itself with nuclear fire and then chose not to. That chose restraint over annihilation when annihilation was fully within their grasp. She began to pace, her movements fluid and hypnotic. Do you know what happened on their world in the year they call 1962? 2 of their nation-states, armed with enough nuclear weapons to sterilize their entire planet several times over, stood at the very precipice of total war. For 13 of their days, the fate of their species hung by a thread thinner than a photon's path. The holographic display shifted, showing archival footage that Theshan observers had captured. Grainy images of military vessels, of men in uniform speaking urgently, of missiles being loaded onto submarines. And do you know what happened? Elder Morvith's voice dropped to barely a whisper, but her telepathic projection ensured every being heard her clearly. They stopped. At the very edge of extinction, when every logical model, every predictive algorithm, every rational analysis said they would destroy themselves, they chose to step back. A single human commander aboard one of their primitive submarines was given an order to launch nuclear weapons. He refused. He refused, even knowing it might cost him everything. And because of that one moment of irrational, illogical mercy, their species survived. Korthax's scales had stopped shimmering. One instance of restraint does not. It was not one instance. Morvith cut him off, her telepathic voice sharp enough to make several delegates wince. It was a pattern. Time and again, humanity has been pushed to the edge of self-destruction. Time and again, they have pulled themselves back, not because they lack the capacity for destruction, but because something in them, something we do not fully understand, refuses to let them end. She turned back to the holographic Earth, watching it rotate slowly. But that is not why you should fear them. That mercy, that restraint, it has limits. And when those limits are reached, when humans are pushed beyond the point of restraint, they become something else entirely. The display changed again, showing scenes that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Cities burning, armies clashing, the mushroom clouds of nuclear detonations. But more than that, the images showed humans adapting, surviving, rebuilding. Over and over, catastrophe after catastrophe, they endured. When their cities are destroyed, they build new ones. When their leaders fall, new leaders rise. When they are pushed to the very edge of extinction, they become more dangerous, not less. They are like a wounded predator, most lethal when they have nothing left to lose. Korthax had heard enough. He slammed his scaled fist against his podium, the sound echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. Enough of this superstitious nonsense. The Veldrani Empire has conquered 47 species. We have pacified entire sectors. We have crushed rebellions that lasted centuries. We will not be frightened by stories about primitives who have not even left their own star system. He activated his own display, showing the massive fleet that had gathered at the edge of the Sol system. 300 warships, each capable of leveling a continent. 50 carrier vessels, each containing 100 atmospheric fighters. 20 bombardment platforms designed to reduce planetary surfaces to glass. This fleet represents the combined military might of the Veldrani Empire, Korthax announced proudly. The humans have nothing that can match it. Their most powerful weapons are chemical explosives and primitive nuclear devices. Their fastest ships cannot even approach 1% of light speed. This will not be a conquest. It will be a formality. Elder Morvith's glow had faded to almost nothing, leaving her looking older than anyone had ever seen her. You will not listen, just as the Korvathi did not listen when they tried to harvest the humans' ocean world 300 of their years ago. Just as the Drexi did not listen when they attempted to establish a mining operation on their 4th planet 60 years ago. This caught the attention of several delegates. The Korathi leader's crest rose sharply. What is she talking about? There are no records of any species contacting Earth before now. No, Morvith agreed, her voice heavy with sorrow. There are not, because the Korvathi and the Drexi no longer exist to maintain records. Their homeworlds are empty, their colonies are silent, their fleets are debris fields. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demanded explanations. The Dreth Collective's unified consciousness flickered with confusion and alarm. Even Korthax seemed momentarily taken aback. "You lie," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. The Korvathi were a myth. The Drexi were a cautionary tale for children. "They were real," Morvith said quietly. "As real as you or I, the Korvathi made first contact with humanity in what the humans call the 17th century. They observed a primitive sailing vessel on Earth's ocean and decided to capture it for study. A simple research mission, nothing more. She manipulated the holographic display, bringing up images that looked impossibly ancient. Strange vessels hovering over wooden ships, beings that looked vaguely insectoid descending on beams of light. The Korvathi took 37 humans. They intended to study them, to catalog them, to add them to their biological archives like specimens in a collection. What they did not anticipate was that the humans would resist, would fight, would refuse to be cataloged. The images shifted to show chaos aboard an alien vessel. Humans, dressed in clothing from centuries past, attacking creatures 3 times their size with nothing but their bare hands and improvised weapons. Blood, both red and purple, splashing against walls. Those 37 humans killed 200 Korvathi researchers before they were finally subdued. But before they died, they managed to access the vessel's navigation systems. They could not read the symbols. They could not understand the technology, but they understood enough to send a signal. A simple transmission in their primitive radio waves containing nothing but their ship's coordinates. Morvith paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. The Korvathi thought nothing of it. Their homeworld was 47 light-years away. The humans had no vessels capable of reaching them. The signal would take nearly half a century to arrive, and by then the Korvathi assumed humanity would have forgotten. They underestimated human memory. They underestimated human patience. And most fatally, they underestimated human rage. "Impossible," Korthax breathed. "They could not have." 312 years later, Morvith continued, ignoring the interruption, the Korvathi homeworld went silent. Every colony, every outpost, every vessel, silent. When the Thessians sent observers to investigate, we found nothing but ruins. Cities reduced to ash, orbital platforms melted to slag. And in the center of what had been their capital city, we found a message carved into the bedrock in letters 3 kilometers high. The holographic display flickered, then showed an aerial view of devastation. Craters where cities had stood, oceans boiled away. And in the midst of the destruction, clearly visible even from orbit, words in a language no galactic species should have recognized. "We remember," Morvith translated. That was all it said, "We remember." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even Korthax had nothing to say. "The Drexi made a similar mistake," Morvith continued, her voice hollow. 60 of Earth's years ago, they established a mining operation on the planet the humans call Mars. They were careful. They stayed hidden. They extracted resources quietly, believing the humans would never know. But the humans did know. They detected the Drexi vessels with their primitive telescopes. They tracked their movements with their basic radar systems. And they waited. They waited until they had developed the technology to reach Mars themselves. They waited until they had built weapons capable of threatening the Drexi. And then, without warning, without negotiation, without any attempt at communication, they struck. The display showed the red planet, but it was different from the barren world most species knew. There were structures on its surface, clearly artificial, and around them the wreckage of spacecraft. The Drexi mining operation was destroyed in a single night. Every vessel, every structure, every individual. The humans did not take prisoners. They did not ask questions. They simply eliminated what they saw as an intrusion into their territory, and then they followed the Drexi home. But the Drexi were a spacefaring species, Yenneith protested, her feathers trembling. They had warships, defense platforms, they should have been able to. They had all of those things, Morvith agreed. And it did not matter. The humans did not fight like any species the Drexi had encountered. They did not form battle lines. They did not engage in honorable combat. They used deception, misdirection, sabotage. They turned the Drexy's own technology against them. They infected their computer systems with malicious code. They poisoned their water supplies. They assassinated their leaders. Within 15 of Earth's years, the Drexy Confederation was gone. Not conquered, not subjugated, gone. Every world, every colony, every last individual. The humans did not want slaves or resources or territory. They wanted revenge, and they got it. Korthax finally found his voice. This is propaganda. Theshan lies designed to protect a species you have taken an inexplicable interest in. The Veldrani Empire will not be deterred by ghost stories. Elder Morvith turned to face him, and for a moment, something ancient and terrible flickered in her silver eyes. Then you will die, Ambassador. You and every Veldrani who serves in that fleet. You will die, and your worlds will burn, and your species will become another cautionary tale that future empires dismiss as myth. She raised her hand, and the holographic display changed one final time. It showed Earth again, but this time, the image was overlaid with data streams and analysis markers. Sensor readings from Theshan observation posts. Communication intercepts from human military channels. And most disturbingly, images of human military installations that seemed far more advanced than anything the Galactic Assembly's intelligence services had detected. You believe the humans are primitive because they allow you to believe it, Morvith said. You see their chemical rockets and their crude nuclear reactors, and you assume that is the limit of their capability. But the Theshans have watched more carefully. We have seen the facilities they hide underground. We have detected the energy signatures they mask with clever engineering. We have intercepted communications that speak of technologies they deliberately keep secret from the galaxy. The humans know we are watching. They have known for decades, and they have been preparing. The display zoomed in on a particular region of Earth, showing what appeared to be a mountain range. But beneath the mountains, rendered in false color imaging that revealed underground structures, was something massive, something that should not have been possible for a species with humanity's supposed level of technology. "What is that?" Yenneith whispered, her feathers now fully flattened against her skull in fear. "We do not know," Morvith admitted. "We have been observing it for 40 years, and we still do not fully understand its purpose. But our analysis suggests it is a weapon designed specifically to threaten spacefaring civilizations, a weapon they have been building in secret since they first detected the Drexy presence in their system." Korthax stared at the display, his scales cycling through colors that indicated deep unease. But pride, as it so often did with the Veldrani, won out over caution. "Even if this weapon exists, it cannot threaten a fleet of 300 warships. Our shields can withstand." "Your shields were designed to withstand weapons you understand," Morvith interrupted. "Plasma cannons, kinetic impactors, antimatter warheads. The humans do not fight with weapons you understand. They fight with weapons you have never imagined. Weapons born from a species that has spent its entire existence preparing for threats from beyond its world." She stepped closer to Korthax, her towering form casting a shadow that seemed to darken half the chamber. "Do you know what humans tell their children, Ambassador? They tell them stories of monsters, of invasions from the sky, of beings from other worlds who come to conquer and enslave. They have been telling these stories for thousands of years, long before they had any evidence that other species existed. It is as if they knew, as if some deep instinct warned them that one day something would come for them. And they have been preparing for that day ever since." "Enough!" The word came from High Commander Veltros, the supreme military authority of the Veldrani Empire. He had remained silent throughout the debate, observing from the shadows at the rear of the chamber. Now he stepped forward, his ancient scales bearing the marks of 100 campaigns. "Elder Morvith, the Theshans have been valued advisors to the Galactic Assembly for millennia. Your wisdom is respected. Your warnings are noted. But the decision has been made. The fleet will proceed. Earth will be brought under Veldrani governance, and the humans will learn their place in the galactic order." Morvith's glow, which had been slowly returning during her warnings, dimmed once more. "Then there is nothing more I can say, but I ask one thing, High Commander. When the communications from your fleet cease, When the reports stop coming, when the silence begins, remember that you were warned. She turned and glided toward the chamber's exit, her ancient form seeming to carry the weight of prophecy. At the doorway, she paused and looked back one final time. The Thessians will mourn you, Veldrani. We mourn all species who do not survive their first contact with humanity. And when the silence comes, we will add your name to the list of warnings that future empires will ignore. And then she was gone, leaving behind a chamber full of beings who had already dismissed her words as the ravings of an ancient fool. The Veldrani fleet entered the Sol system 3 standard days later. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperator's Wrath, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger in the main display. Around him, his bridge crew conducted their duties with the quiet efficiency that had made the Veldrani Navy the terror of half the galaxy. "Any response to our transmission?" Korath asked, his scales shifting to the pale blue that indicated patient confidence. "Negative, Admiral," his communications officer reported. "We have been broadcasting the standard subjugation ultimatum on all frequencies for 6 hours. No response from the planetary government. No military vessels have launched. No defensive platforms have activated." Korath's scales shifted toward smug green, just as he had expected. The humans were paralyzed with fear, unable to respond to the overwhelming force arrayed against them. Elder Morvath's warning seemed even more ridiculous now that he was here, looking at the primitive world with his own eyes. "What do our sensors show?" he asked. "Minimal orbital infrastructure," his sensor officer replied. "We have detected approximately 300 satellites, mostly communication and observation platforms. No weapon signatures, no shield generators. Their largest vessels appear to be research stations, completely unarmed. And their planetary defenses. We have identified several hundred nuclear missile installations, but they appear to be aimed at each other rather than at orbital targets. Ground-based radar stations, some experimental laser facilities that might be capable of tracking our vessels, but nothing that could threaten them." Korath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 300 warships to conquer a planet that could not even muster a defense. It was almost disappointing. Almost. "Admiral," his tactical officer interrupted, "we are detecting unusual activity on the surface. Multiple underground facilities are powering up. Energy signatures are consistent with geothermal power plants, but the output levels are unusual." "Unusual how?" "They appear to be generating approximately 10,000 times more power than any civilian application would require, and the energy is being directed somewhere, we cannot determine where." For the first time, a flicker of unease passed through Korath's scales, but he suppressed it quickly. Whatever the humans were doing, it could not possibly threaten his fleet. They were primitive, divided, weak. "Prepare the subjugation broadcast," he ordered. "Standard terms: surrender or face orbital bombardment. And begin moving the fleet into attack formation. If they do not respond within 1 planetary rotation, we begin the conquest." The broadcast was sent. The fleet moved into position, forming a perfect hemisphere around the planet that would allow them to strike any point on the surface within seconds. And then they waited. The response came exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum was delivered. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was not even a declaration of defiance. It was a single transmission, broadcast on every frequency the humans could generate, reaching every vessel in the Veldrani fleet simultaneously. The message contained only 2 words, spoken in a human language that the translation systems had no trouble interpreting. "We remember." Admiral Korath had exactly 3 seconds to feel the cold grip of fear before the universe went white. The weapon the humans had been building for decades activated all at once. It was not a single device, but a network of them, spread across the planet and the inner system, linked together by quantum entanglement into a single unified system. The Thessians, observing from the safety of deep space, would later classify it as a gravitational displacement array, though that terminology failed to capture the sheer destructive elegance of its design. In the span of a heartbeat, localized gravity wells formed around every vessel in the Veldrani fleet. Not strong enough to crush them outright, but strong enough to trap them, to hold them in place while the second phase of the weapon activated. From installations across Earth and on the Moon and Mars, beams of focused energy lanced upward. But they were not ordinary energy weapons. They were something the galaxy had never seen before, something born from human ingenuity and human paranoia and decades of secret research. The beams struck the trapped vessels and did not burn them or vaporize them. Instead, they destabilized the fundamental forces that held matter together. The Imperator's Wrath, flagship of the greatest fleet the Veldrani Empire had ever assembled, simply came apart. Not in an explosion, not in a cascade of secondary detonations. It disintegrated, its hull separating into component atoms, its crew experiencing approximately 1/10 of a second of absolute horror before they ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Around the planet, 300 warships suffered the same fate, 50 carriers, 20 bombardment platforms. In less than 10 seconds, the entire invasion force was reduced to a diffuse cloud of scattered atoms, slowly falling toward Earth's atmosphere where they would burn up like the remnants of shooting stars. And then the humans did something that would haunt the galactic community for millennia to come. They did not stop. In a facility buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a human named Danny Patterson sat at a console that controlled the most powerful weapon ever created. He was 34 years old, with tired eyes and 3 days of stubble on his jaw. He had joined the Planetary Defense Initiative straight out of college, had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, and had hoped with every fiber of his being that it would never come. Beside him, Commander Lisa Hartley studied the tactical display with cold precision. She had commanded the initiative's response center for 7 years, had overseen countless drills and simulations, had always known that one day the drills would become real. "Hostile fleet neutralized," Danny reported, his voice steady despite the enormity of what had just occurred. "No surviving vessels detected." "Begin Phase 2, Lisa ordered without hesitation. Danny's fingers hesitated over the console. "Commander, Phase 2 is. Are we sure? They're done. They can't hurt us anymore." Lisa turned to face him, her expression as hard as the mountain above them. "They came here to enslave us, Patterson, to put collars around our necks and chains on our children, and they will do it again if we give them the chance. Other species will do it again, unless we make them understand." "Understand what?" "That humanity is not prey, that we will never be prey, that anyone who threatens our world, our people, will pay a price so terrible that no species will ever dare threaten us again." She placed her hand on his shoulder, and for a moment her expression softened. "I know it's hard, Danny. I know what I'm asking you to do, but think about your daughter. Think about what would have happened to her if those ships had succeeded. Think about what will happen to every child on Earth if we show weakness now." Danny closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter, 6 years old, with his wife's smile and his mother's stubborn streak. He thought about the Veldrani coming for her, putting her in chains, treating her like an animal to be owned and controlled. He opened his eyes and began entering the commands. Phase 2 initiated. The weapon system that humanity had built was designed for more than just defense. It could project its effects across interstellar distances, using the same quantum entanglement technology that made faster-than-light travel possible. The humans had not invented this technology themselves. They had reverse-engineered it from the wreckage of Drexy vessels decades ago. But they had improved upon it in ways the Drexy never could have imagined. The beams that had destroyed the Veldrani fleet were merely the system's secondary function. Its primary purpose was far more terrible. Across the galaxy, the Veldrani Empire consisted of 47 conquered worlds, each one populated by millions of Veldrani citizens and billions of subjugated peoples from other species. Their homeworld, Veldrax Prime, was a massive planet with 3 moons, each one converted into orbital habitats housing additional billions. The humans knew exactly where it was. They had known for years, ever since they had intercepted Veldrani communications and begun mapping the Empire's infrastructure. They knew the locations of every major population center, every military installation, every orbital platform. And now, with the press of a button, Danny Patterson sent all of that information to the weapon system's targeting computer. On Veldrax Prime, High Commander Veltros was reviewing reports from his intelligence officers when his communications array suddenly screamed with incoming alerts. Emergency signals from colonies across the Empire, each one reporting the same impossible phenomenon. Gravity anomalies, energy surges, ships vanishing without explanation. "What is happening?" he demanded, his scales flashing through colors of confusion and fear. Before anyone could answer, the sky above the Imperial Palace turned white. The Thessians, watching from observation posts scattered throughout the galaxy, recorded everything. They documented the destruction of Veldrax Prime. They documented the systematic elimination of every Veldrani military installation. They documented the deaths of billions. And they documented something else. Something that would define humanity's reputation in the galaxy for eons to come. The humans did not destroy everything. They were precise, surgical. Military targets were eliminated without mercy. Warships, weapons platforms, command centers all reduced to atomic dust. But civilian populations on conquered worlds were spared. The slaves the Veldrani had kept for generations suddenly found themselves free, their masters gone, the chains that had bound them dissolved. It was a message, a statement of intent. Humanity would not tolerate aggression, would not accept threats, would not spare those who came to conquer. But they were not indiscriminate. They were not mindless. They made a distinction between enemies and innocents, between aggressors and victims. In the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Assembly, now empty of Veldrani representatives, Elder Morveth stood before the remaining delegates. Her glow had returned to its full brightness, but there was no satisfaction in her expression. Only sorrow and the weary resignation of one who had seen this tragedy coming and been powerless to prevent it. "The Veldrani Empire is no more," she announced, her telepathic voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. 47 worlds have lost their military infrastructure. The Veldrani species itself has been reduced by approximately 60%. The survivors are in chaos, their government collapsed, their fleet destroyed, their empire ended. The remaining delegates sat in stunned silence. The Korathi, the Dreth, the Silmari, all of them struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. "You warned them," Yeneth finally said, her feathers still flattened with fear. "You warned us all." "I did," Morveth agreed. "And now you have seen the truth of those warnings. Humanity is not prey. They are not primitives to be conquered. They are something the galaxy has never encountered before. A species that combines the capacity for terrible violence with the capacity for terrible restraint. A species that can destroy empires but chooses to spare innocents. A species that remembers every wrong done to them and repays it 1,000-fold. She gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed Earth surrounded by the dissipating cloud of atoms that had once been the mightiest fleet in the galaxy. "The humans have sent us a message, not in words but in deeds. They are telling us that they are no longer content to hide, that they are ready to take their place among the stars. And they are warning us as clearly as I tried to warn the Veldrani that any species who threatens them will suffer the same fate." "What do they want?" the Dreth Collective asked, their unified voice carrying an undertone of primal fear. "What do they demand?" "That is the question, is it not?" Morveth replied. "We do not know. We have never truly communicated with them. We have only watched from afar, observed their development, and hoped that when this day finally came, they would show mercy." As if in answer to her words, the communication systems of the assembly chamber suddenly activated. A new transmission was being broadcast from Earth, reaching every species capable of receiving it. A human appeared on the display, a female with dark hair and steady eyes, wearing a uniform that bore symbols no galactic species had seen before. "This is Secretary General Patricia Kane of the United Earth Government," the human said, her voice calm and measured. "We are addressing the Galactic Assembly and all species within range of this transmission. What you have witnessed today is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-defense, an answer to those who would enslave us." She paused, her eyes seeming to look directly at each individual delegate. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not seek conquest. We do not seek to impose our will on other species. All we have ever wanted is to be left in peace, to develop at our own pace, to find our own way among the stars. But we will not accept subjugation. We will not accept slavery. We will not accept any species treating our world, our people, as resources to be exploited. And we have demonstrated, I hope conclusively, what will happen to any species that tries. Her expression softened slightly. We know that not all species share the Veldrani's ambitions. We know that many of you have watched us with curiosity, perhaps even with hope. To those species, we extend a hand of friendship. We would welcome peaceful contact. We would welcome trade, cultural exchange, the sharing of knowledge. We want to be part of the galactic community, not apart from it. But let there be no misunderstanding. Any species that threatens us will be destroyed. Any species that attempts to enslave us will be ended. We remember every wrong done to us and we repay our debts in full. This is not a warning, it is a promise. The transmission ended, leaving the assembly chamber in silence once more. Elder Morvith studied the faces of the remaining delegates, watching understanding slowly dawn in their varied expressions. And so it begins, she said quietly. A new era for the galaxy. An era in which humanity walks among us, not as prey, not as conquerors, but as equals. How that era unfolds will depend on the choices we make now in this moment in the aftermath of destruction. Yenneith rose from her seat, her feathers slowly returning to their normal position. We should respond, accept their offer of friendship, show them that we are not their enemies. Agreed, the Dreth Collective said. The humans have shown both their capacity for violence and their capacity for restraint. We would rather be their friends than their enemies. One by one, the remaining delegates voiced their agreement. The Silmari, the Tesseril, the Vronthai, all of them choosing in the shadow of the Veldrani's destruction to embrace peace rather than risk the same fate. Elder Morvith watched the consensus form with something approaching hope. Perhaps, she thought, this would be different. Perhaps humanity, despite their terrible power, would choose a path of cooperation rather than domination. Perhaps the warnings she had given, the destruction she had witnessed, would not need to be repeated. But deep in her ancient heart, she knew better. She had lived for 3,000 years. She had seen species rise and fall. She knew that power, once demonstrated, was never forgotten. And she knew that somewhere in the galaxy, other species were watching these events unfold, were calculating their own responses, were deciding whether to reach out in friendship or prepare for war. The humans had stepped onto the galactic stage with the destruction of an empire. They had announced their presence with the deaths of billions. They had offered peace, but they had offered it with blood still wet on their hands. And Elder Morvith knew, with the certainty of millennia, that this was only the beginning. On Earth, in the underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Danny Patterson sat at his console and stared at his hands. The same hands that had just killed more beings than he could comprehend. The same hands that had ended an empire, freed billions of slaves, and changed the course of galactic history. Commander Lisa Hartley stood beside him, her hand still on his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They had done what needed to be done. They had protected their world, their species, their children, and they had paid a price that neither of them could yet fully understand. Around them, the facility hummed with activity. Reports were coming in from observation posts around the system. Confirmation that the Veldrani fleet had been completely destroyed. Confirmation that the long-range strikes had hit their targets. Confirmation that humanity was, for the first time in its history, truly safe from external threat. But Danny knew that safety was an illusion. There would be other threats. Other species who looked at Earth and saw opportunity. Other empires who refused to learn from the Veldrani's mistake. And when they came, he would be here, ready to press the button again. He thought about his daughter, safe at home, unaware of what her father had just done. He thought about the future she would inherit, a future in which humanity was no longer alone in the universe, no longer able to pretend that the stars held only wonder and discovery. And he thought about the message they had sent, the two words that had heralded the destruction of an empire. We remember. It was more than a statement. It was a promise, a warning, a declaration of intent that would echo through the galaxy for eons to come. Humanity remembered. Every slight, every threat, every act of aggression, they remembered and they repaid. Danny looked up at Commander Hartley, searching for something in her expression, reassurance perhaps, or absolution. But he found only the same determination that had carried them through the crisis, the same cold certainty that had allowed her to give the order. "It was necessary," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "They would have enslaved us. They would have destroyed everything we are, everything we could become. We did what we had to do." "I know," Danny replied. "I know it was necessary, I know we had no choice, but that doesn't make it easier, it doesn't make the weight any lighter." Lisa nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't, but we carry that weight because others can't, because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light, because that's what it means to be human." She turned away from him, looking up at the main display, where the blue marble of Earth rotated slowly beneath a sky now empty of threats. "We remember," she said softly. "We remember who we are. We remember what we fight for. We remember what we're willing to sacrifice. And we remember what happens to those who forget that we are not prey." The facility continued its work around them, monitoring the system, preparing for whatever threats might come next. But in that moment, surrounded by the hum of machines and the weight of their actions, Danny Patterson and Lisa Hartley shared a silence that needed no words. They had saved their world. They had announced humanity's presence to the galaxy. They had ensured that no species would ever again underestimate the children of Earth. And they had done it all with a memory that stretched back centuries, to a time when 37 humans on a wooden sailing ship had shown an alien species that humanity would never submit, would never surrender, would never forget. In the Galactic Assembly, plans were already being made for the first official contact with humanity. Delegation leader Yeneth of the Korathi had volunteered to lead the diplomatic mission, a gesture of good faith that her species hoped would establish a foundation of trust. The Dreth Collective had begun preparing cultural exchange programs, eager to learn from a species that had achieved something no one in the galaxy had thought possible. But Elder Morvith did not join in these preparations. Instead, she returned to her quarters aboard the Theshan observation vessel that had carried her to the assembly, and she began composing a message. A final warning, to be transmitted to every Theshan outpost in the galaxy, to be preserved in their archives for as long as the Theshan species endured. "To all who read these words in the ages to come," she wrote, "remember the lesson of the Veldrani. Remember the fate of the Korvathi and the Drexi before them. Remember what happens when arrogance blinds wisdom, when strength masquerades as invincibility, when those who should listen choose instead to mock. The humans are not our enemies. They do not seek conquest or domination. But they are not our friends either, not yet, and perhaps never truly. They are something new in the galaxy, something we do not fully understand and may never fully trust. They carry within them a capacity for both creation and destruction that exceeds anything we have encountered in 40,000 years of observation. Treat them with respect, treat them with honesty, and above all, treat them with caution, for they remember everything, every kindness and every cruelty, every gift and every threat. And when the time comes to settle accounts, they settle them completely." She paused, considering her words carefully. Then she added one final line. "The elders warned us." The Veldrani did not listen, and now their worlds are silent. She transmitted the message and sat back, watching through her viewport as the stars turned slowly past. Somewhere out there, humanity was preparing to take its first steps into the greater galaxy. Somewhere out there, species were reassessing their assumptions, reconsidering their plans, recalculating the balance of power. And somewhere out there in the empty spaces where the Veldrani had once ruled, debris clouds drifted in eternal silence, monuments to the folly of those who had mocked the warnings of the wise. Elder Morvith closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of rest. She had done what she could. She had warned them as she had warned so many before. Some had listened. Most had not. But perhaps, just perhaps, those who came after would remember, would learn, would understand that the galaxy had changed forever on the day the humans announced themselves. And perhaps in remembering, they would choose a different path. The stars turned on, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. But in the records of the Thessians, in the archives of the Galactic Assembly, in the memories of every species that had witnessed the events of that terrible day, one truth would endure forever. They mocked the elders' warnings about Earth, and moments later their worlds went silent. The humans had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.